I was standing in the hallway, adjusting my brand new hearing aids, when my son's voice drifted from the kitchen. "She's too deaf to hear us anyway," Daniel whispered. I froze. Rachel laughed softly. "Good. Then we just need her to sign before she figures anything out." My heart dropped so fast it felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. Because just hours earlier, Dr. Collins had smiled and told me something simple. Something they clearly didn't know. "These devices don't just help you hear," he said. "They can record too." And in that moment, I realized I had just captured the beginning of their betrayal. If this moment made your chest tighten like it did mine, take a second to like this video and subscribe. I'd love to know, what would you do if you heard your own child say something like that? And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes sharing your voice is the first step to being heard. I didn't move right away. I stood there in that narrow hallway, my hand still hovering near my ear, as if adjusting the hearing aids again might somehow change what I had just heard. But the silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. It pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. My son thought I couldn't hear him. Worse, he believed I couldn't understand him. I slowly walked back into my cottage, closing the door behind me with a quiet click. My hands were shaking, not violently, but enough that I had to steady myself against the small kitchen counter. For a moment, I simply stared at the familiar space, the little ceramic mug on the table, the folded blanket on the chair, the framed photo of Robert, my late husband, smiling in that warm, steady way that used to make everything feel safe. "Robert," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. What did I miss? 'Cause the truth was, I hadn't always been like this. 2 years ago, before Robert passed, I was still sharp, independent, and whole. We had built a life together in our marina house just outside Charleston. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. Mornings by the water, evenings with soft jazz playing in the background, conversations that stretched for hours, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. Then he was gone. And grief has a way of rearranging you without asking permission. My hearing started to decline not long after the funeral. At first it was subtle. I would ask people to repeat themselves, turn the television up just a little louder, miss a word here and there in conversations. I blamed it on stress, on age, on anything but fear. But slowly, the world became quieter and lonelier. Daniel was the one who suggested I move. "Mom, you shouldn't be out there alone," he had said, sitting across from me at the dining table, his tone soft, concerned. "Come stay with us. We've got that guest cottage out back. You'll still have your own space, but we can check on you every day." Rachel had nodded, her hand resting gently on my arm. "It's the best of both worlds, Mia. Independence and support." At the time, it had sounded like love. So I agreed. I packed up my things, locked the marina house, and moved into their property, into the small, tidy guest cottage tucked behind their main home. It was cozy, comfortable, and close enough that I could hear the laughter from their kitchen through the open windows in the evenings. At first, it felt like I had made the right decision. Daniel would come by every morning with coffee. Rachel would ask about my appointments. Emily would stop in after school, dropping her backpack by the door and telling me about her day in that rapid, excited voice teenagers have. I told myself I was lucky. But now, standing in my cottage with that recording sitting quietly inside my hearing aids, memories began to shift. Little things I had brushed aside started lining up in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I had never intended to solve. The mail. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Daniel had insisted on picking it up for me. "It's easier, Mom. Sometimes you don't hear the delivery and things get left out there," he'd said. So I let him. But there had been moments, small, nagging moments, when I realized I hadn't seen a bank statement in weeks, or when I vaguely remembered expecting something from my insurance company that never arrived. I had assumed I simply forgot. Now I wasn't so sure. Then there were the phone calls. More than once I had told Daniel I felt like people had stopped calling me. Old friends, former colleagues, even distant relatives. "They probably tried, Mom," he would say gently. "You just didn't hear the phone." And I had believed him, because believing him was easier than admitting I was becoming invisible. Rachel, too, had slowly inserted herself into parts of my life that used to belong to me alone. Doctor's appointments became our appointments. "Oh, Mia, it's just easier if I go with you," she would say with a bright smile. "I can help explain things if you don't catch everything." At first I was grateful. Later, I barely noticed when she began speaking for me. "She's been a bit forgetful," Rachel would say lightly to the doctor, as if I weren't sitting right there. "And her hearing makes it hard for her to keep track of instructions." I would nod, embarrassed, eager not to cause trouble, eager not to be a burden. Now, standing alone in my cottage, I reached up slowly and tapped the side of my hearing aid, my fingers trembling. The recording. I remembered what Dr. Collins had shown me earlier that day, how to access the files through a simple app, how each sound clip was time-stamped, clear, undeniable. At the time, I had laughed softly. "Oh, I don't need all that," I had told him. "I just want to hear my granddaughter properly again." He had smiled kindly. "It's always better to have more than you need than less than you wish you had." I swallowed hard as I walked to the small table and picked up my phone. My hands hesitated for just a moment before opening the app. There it was, a new file, recorded only minutes ago. I pressed play. The sound came through clearer than I expected, sharper, colder. "She's too deaf to hear us anyway," Daniel's voice whispered. Rachel's reply followed immediately. "Good. Then we just need her to sign before she figures anything out." My breath caught. I listened again, and again. Each time the words cut deeper. But it wasn't just what they said. It was how they said it. Calm, calculated, certain, as if I wasn't a person anymore, just a problem to be managed. I forced myself to listen all the way through. There were a few seconds of silence, then Rachel again, quieter this time. "We need to move quickly. Timing matters. If she starts asking questions about the house," the recording ended abruptly. The house. My eyes lifted slowly toward the window, toward the direction of the marina property miles away. The last place that still truly belonged to me, the last piece of my life with Robert that hadn't been touched. Why were they talking about it like that? What papers needed signing, and why did it sound like they were racing against me, as if I were something that might wake up at any moment? A cold realization began to settle over me. This wasn't new. This wasn't something they had just started discussing tonight. This had been building, planning, growing quietly in the background while I sat in that cottage, trusting them, depending on them, thanking them. I felt something shift inside me then, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. The same woman who had spent months shrinking, apologizing, second-guessing, staying quiet, began to straighten just a little. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in the dark anymore. I had heard them. Every word. And they had no idea. That night I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, replaying every word I had heard. Not just from the recording, but from memory. Conversations. Moments. Silences that suddenly felt louder than anything else. Once you realize you've been lied to, your mind becomes a detective. It rewinds everything, re-examines everything, and worst of all, it fills in the gaps. Around midnight, I sat up slowly and reached for my hearing aids on the nightstand. My hands were steadier now, not calm, but focused. If they thought I couldn't hear, then that was exactly what I would let them believe. I placed the hearing aids back in carefully, quietly. Then I stood and walked toward the small window that faced the main house. A soft glow still came from the kitchen. They were awake, talking. I slipped on my cardigan and stepped outside, moving slowly across the grass. The night air was cool, carrying that faint coastal scent I used to love when Robert and I sat on our porch. Tonight it felt sharp, almost bitter. I didn't go too close, just close enough. The kitchen window was slightly open, and this time, I heard everything. "We don't have much time," Rachel was saying, her voice low but urgent. "The bank isn't going to wait forever." Daniel sighed. "I know that. I told you I'm handling it." "You're not handling it," she snapped. "You're delaying it. There's a difference." A pause. Then Daniel again, quieter. "Once she signs, we'll be fine. The marina property alone covers everything." My stomach twisted. Everything. Everything, what Rachel let out, a short, humorless laugh. "Only if we get control of it before she starts asking questions." "That hearing test today, what if it actually helps her?" Daniel scoffed. "It won't matter. She's still slow, and she trusts me." The words hit harder than anything else. She trusts me. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself not to react, not to make a sound. Rachel lowered her voice again. "We need that evaluation scheduled." The sooner we can show she's not capable of managing things, the easier this gets. Evaluation. My mind snapped back to earlier that evening. The recording. She won't even understand what she's signing, Rachel added. We just present it as support paperwork. Power of attorney asset consolidation, whatever sounds simple enough. Daniel hesitated. And if she refuses, she won't, Rachel said firmly. Not if we keep playing this right. There was something chilling about the certainty in her voice, like this wasn't a possibility. It was a plan already in motion. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain they could hear it through the walls. But they didn't. Their voices continued fading slightly as I moved away. I didn't need to hear more. I had heard enough. When I got back inside my cottage, I locked the door behind me for the first time since moving there. That alone told me everything had changed. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring at my hands. They were steady now. Too steady. That scared me more than the shaking had, because it meant something inside me had hardened. I reached for my phone and opened the app again, saving the new recording. I labeled it carefully, adding the date and time. Evidence. The word felt foreign, but necessary. For a long moment, I just sat there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the small wall clock, ordinary sounds, safe sounds. Then something else surfaced in my mind. The doctor's visits. Rachel's voice. She's been a bit forgetful. She struggles to keep track. She might need more supervision. At the time, I had thought she was helping. Now I heard it differently. She wasn't describing me. She was building a narrative, a story, one where I was no longer capable, no longer independent, no longer reliable. I stood abruptly and walked to the small desk in the corner, pulling open the drawer where I kept my papers. It was thinner than it should have been, much thinner. Where were my insurance statements, my Medicare supplement documents, my pharmacy receipts? I frowned, trying to recall the last time I had physically held them. I couldn't, because Daniel had organized everything for me. You don't need to worry about all this anymore, Mom, he had said. Let me take care of it. And I had let him, because he was my son, because I trusted him, because I didn't want to be difficult. A sudden wave of anger rose in my chest, sharp, unfamiliar. Not loud, not explosive, but deep. It wasn't just that they were trying to take something from me. It was that they had slowly convinced me I didn't deserve to hold on to it in the first place, that I was too old, too slow, too broken. I sank back into the chair, pressing my hands flat against the table. No, I whispered. The word felt strange on my tongue, but it also felt right. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about how to avoid conflict. I was thinking about how to see clearly, and clarity is dangerous to people who rely on your confusion. A soft knock at the door startled me. I froze, then slowly stood and walked over, peering through the small window. It was Susan. Relief flooded through me so suddenly my knees almost gave out. I opened the door quickly. Susan, what are you doing here this late? She stepped inside, her expression immediately shifting as she took in my face. Mia, what's wrong? I hesitated, for just a second, because saying it out loud would make it real. But then I remembered Daniel's voice. She trusts me, and I knew I couldn't carry this alone. I need you to listen to something, I said quietly. Susan didn't ask questions. She simply nodded. We sat at the table and I pressed play. As the recording filled the room, I watched her face change. First confusion, then disbelief, then something colder. When it ended, she looked at me not with pity, but with something far more powerful. Clarity. How long? She asked. I don't know, I admitted, but it's not new. She nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. No, it's not. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she leaned forward, her voice firm. You cannot confront them yet. The certainty in her tone caught me off guard. I wasn't planning to. Good, she cut in gently. Because right now they think you're unaware. That's your advantage. Advantage. Another word that felt foreign, but not wrong. They're building something, Susan continued. Paperwork, a case, maybe even legal control. I swallowed. They mentioned an evaluation. Her eyes darkened. Of course they did. My heart began to race again. What do I do? Susan reached across the table and took my hand. You start paying attention, she said. To everything. I nodded slowly. She squeezed my hand once more. "And you don't let them see that anything has changed." I looked down at our hands, then back up at her. For the first time since the hallway, since those words, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt awake. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the fear, beneath the hurt, something else began to form. Not revenge, not yet, but resolve. Because they thought I couldn't hear them. They thought I couldn't understand. They thought I was already losing myself. But they were wrong. And the most dangerous thing about that was that they had no idea I knew. The next morning, everything looked exactly the same. Sunlight slipped through the curtains in thin, golden lines. The kettle hummed softly on the stove. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear a lawnmower starting up one of the neighbors, keeping up appearances just like the rest of us. Ordinary, safe, almost comforting, if I hadn't known better. I sat at the small table in my cottage, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone lukewarm. I hadn't taken a single sip. My mind was too busy moving faster than it had in months. Susan sat across from me, a legal pad open in front of her, a pen poised in her hand like she was preparing for surgery. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. "Everything you can remember, even the small things." I nodded, and then I began. I told her about the move, how Daniel and Rachel had insisted it was for my safety, how they had framed it as temporary at first, then gradually made it feel permanent. I described the missing mail the way Daniel always intercepted it before I could reach the mailbox. Susan wrote quickly, her expression tightening with every detail. "Have you personally seen a bank statement in the last 3 months?" she asked. I hesitated. "No." Her pen paused. "Okay, what about insurance paperwork? Medicare supplement notices, prescription summaries?" I swallowed. I remember expecting something, but I never saw it. Susan leaned back slightly, exhaling through her nose. "That's not an accident, Mia." I looked down at my hands. I know. Saying it out loud felt different. Heavier, but also clearer. Susan leaned forward again. "We're going to verify everything, quietly. No alerts, no confrontations. If they're doing what I think they're doing, we need proof." "Proof. That word again?" I nodded. "Where do we start?" I asked. She gave me a small, reassuring smile. "With what they can't control." By mid-morning, we were in Susan's car driving toward a small local bank branch where I had originally opened my primary account years ago, long before Daniel ever helped me manage it. I felt a strange knot in my stomach as we pulled into the parking lot. What if there's nothing I said quietly? What if I'm overreacting? Susan turned to me, her gaze steady. "Mia," she said softly, "you don't imagine recordings like that." I nodded, but the doubt lingered, because part of me still wanted to be wrong, still wanted this to be a misunderstanding. We walked inside together. The air conditioning hit my skin cool and sharp. Everything smelled faintly of paper and polished floors. A young woman at the counter greeted us with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" I hesitated for just a second. Then I straightened my shoulders. "I'd like to review my account activity," I said. "Personally." The word personally felt important. The woman nodded. "Of course." "Do you have identification?" I handed it over, my fingers steady. Within minutes, we were seated at a small desk with a printed summary of my recent transactions, and that's when the world shifted again. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Deposits, withdrawals, routine payments. But then Susan leaned in closer, pointing to a series of transfers. "Do you recognize these?" she asked. I squinted slightly, reading the descriptions. Household expense transfer, shared maintenance contribution, utility consolidation. My stomach tightened. "No," I said slowly. "I've never authorized those." Susan nodded once, her lips pressing into a thin line. "They're consistent," she said. "Regular amounts. Same destination account." I looked up at her. "Daniel." She didn't answer immediately, but she didn't need to. I felt the answer settle into my chest like a weight. The bank employee returned with additional documents. "These are the linked accounts associated with your profile," she explained. I scanned the page. There it was. An account I didn't recognize. Partially connected to mine. "How was this added?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The employee glanced at the screen. "It appears it was authorized in person, about 4 months ago." 4 months. That was around the time Daniel had insisted on helping me reorganize my finances. He said it would make things easier, I murmured. Susan's hand rested lightly on my arm. Mia, she said gently, did you sign anything that day I tried to remember? The kitchen table. A stack of papers. Daniel smiling reassuringly. Just routine updates, Mom. I had signed. Without reading carefully. Without questioning. Because I trusted him. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I didn't know, I whispered. Susan squeezed my arm. That's exactly how these things happen. Not through force, through trust. We left the bank with copies of everything, every transaction, every authorization, every quiet shift I had never noticed. Back in the car, I stared at the papers in my lap. They've been taking money, I said slowly. Regularly. Susan nodded. And not small amounts, she added. Enough to matter. Enough to build something or cover something. Cover something. The words echoed in my mind. The conversation from the night before came rushing back. The bank isn't going to wait forever. They're behind. This is all for nothing. My chest tightened. This isn't just greed, I said. They're desperate. Susan glanced at me. Yes, she said. And desperate people make dangerous decisions. I looked out the window as we drove. Everything outside looked so normal. People walking, cars passing, life continuing. But inside me, something had changed again. Because now I wasn't just dealing with betrayal. I was dealing with intention, planning, execution. They hadn't just talked about using me, they had already started. When we returned to the house, everything felt different. The main house stood there quiet and still, as if nothing inside it had shifted. As if the people inside weren't carefully rearranging my life behind closed doors. Susan turned off the engine but didn't move. We're not done, she said. I nodded. I know. She looked at me seriously. Next step, insurance. My heart sank. I had almost forgotten. The canceled appointment. The sudden increase in medication costs. Daniel's explanation. It's just a system glitch, Mom. These things happen. I had believed him. Because it was easier. Because it was simpler. Because I didn't want to think he would lie about something like that. Susan continued, if they're manipulating your medical coverage, that's not just financial. That's strategic. I turned to her. Strategic how? Her eyes held mine. They make you look unstable, neglectful, unable to manage your own care. A chill ran down my spine. The evaluation, the comments at the doctor's office. She's been forgetful. She struggles to follow instructions. I felt my breath catch. They're building a case, I whispered. Susan nodded. Yes. The word landed like a final piece clicking into place. Everything suddenly made sense. The missing mail, the controlled conversations, the financial shifts, the medical interference. It wasn't random. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate, carefully constructed, piece by piece, to make me disappear, legally. I sat there in silence, the weight of that realization settling deep into my bones. Then slowly, something else rose to meet it. Not fear, not confusion. Something steadier, stronger. They think I'm weak, I said quietly. Susan didn't interrupt. They think I won't notice, I continued, that I won't understand, that I won't fight. My voice didn't shake. Not this time. I looked down at the stack of papers in my lap, then back at the house. My son believes I'm already gone, I said. Susan reached over, placing her hand over mine. But you're not, she said firmly. I met her eyes. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed it. No, I said softly. Then a little stronger. No, I'm not. And if they were building a case against me, then it was time I started building one of my own. That afternoon I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I made a decision without telling Daniel. It sounds like such a small thing, almost childish even. But when you've slowly handed pieces of your life over to someone else, your son, your family, taking one back feels like reclaiming oxygen after being underwater too long. I'm going to see Dr. Collins, I told Susan as we sat in my cottage going over the bank documents again. She looked up immediately. Good. Go alone. I hesitated. What if Rachel already? Let her wonder. Susan cut in gently. You're allowed to have appointments without permission, Mia. That word again. Allowed. I nodded slowly. You're right. And for the first time, I truly meant it. The drive to the audiology clinic felt longer than usual, even though I had taken that same road just the day before. My hands stayed firm on the steering wheel, my eyes focused, but my mind was racing. Rachel had called the clinic. She had asked about my hearing aids. That detail wouldn't leave me. It meant she was careful. It meant she thought ahead. And it meant deep down she knew there was a risk. When I walked into the clinic, the familiar scent of disinfectant and polished surfaces greeted me. Calm, clinical, predictable. A young receptionist smiled politely. Mrs. Carter, you're back already? Yes, I said with a small smile. I had a couple of follow-up questions. She nodded and disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, Dr. Andrew Collins stepped into the hallway, his expression warm but slightly curious. Mia, he said, everything all right with the devices? Yes, I replied. They're working very well. There was a pause. He studied my face for just a moment longer than usual. Then he gestured toward his office. Come in. Once the door closed behind us, the shift was immediate. I didn't sit right away. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and placed it on his desk. I need you to listen to something, I said quietly. His expression changed, not alarmed, but attentive. He nodded once. Okay. I pressed play. The room filled with Daniel's voice. She's too deaf to hear us anyway. Then Rachel. Good. Then we just need her to sign before she figures anything out. I watched Dr. Collins carefully as the audio played. He didn't interrupt, didn't react immediately. But I saw it, the tightening in his jaw, the subtle shift in his posture. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was heavier than anything else in the room. He leaned back slowly in his chair. Mia, he said, his voice calm but firm. How long has this been happening? I swallowed. I'm not sure, I admitted, but long enough. He nodded, absorbing that. Then he asked, do they know these devices can record? No, I said, and I don't plan on telling them. A faint, almost approving look crossed his face. That's wise, he said. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I need to understand exactly what I have, I continued. What these recordings can do. How reliable they are. Doctor. Collins leaned forward slightly, his professional tone settling in. They're high-quality digital recordings, he explained, time-stamped, clear, not easily altered without detection. Would they hold up? I asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. Yes. The word landed with weight. Not comfort, not relief, but certainty. I nodded slowly. Can you help me export everything I asked? Organize it properly, of course, he said. We'll make copies. Backup files. You'll want redundancy. Redundancy. Another word that felt technical, but necessary. As he began setting things up on his computer, he paused briefly, then looked back at me. There's something else, he said. My heart tightened. What is it? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. A woman called yesterday, he said, asked very specific questions about your devices. I felt the answer before he said the name. Rachel. He nodded. She didn't identify herself as your daughter-in-law, he continued, but she asked whether the hearing aids had recording capabilities and whether users were typically aware of that feature. A chill spread through me. She's smarter than I thought, I murmured. Doctor. Collins didn't disagree. She was probing, he said, carefully. But yes. I looked down at my hands. So Rachel hadn't been entirely certain. She had suspected, but she hadn't known. That meant one thing. I still had the advantage, and she had just enough doubt to make her dangerous. An hour later, I left the clinic with more than just my hearing aids. I had copies of every recording, organized, time-stamped, backed up, real, proof. But even more than that, I had something else. Clarity. Because until that moment, a small part of me had still hoped this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Now there was no room for doubt. This was intentional, deliberate, and escalating. Susan was waiting for me when I returned. She didn't ask how it went. She simply looked at my face and nodded. Okay, she said quietly. What did we learn? I placed the folder of documents and recordings on the table. They're solid, I said. Clear. Time-stamped. Admissible. Susan exhaled slowly. Good. And Rachel knows just enough to be suspicious, I added. She called the clinic. Susan's expression darkened slightly. That makes this more urgent. I nodded. I know. We sat down across from each other again, the table between us now filled with evidence instead of uncertainty. Susan tapped the folder lightly. This is powerful, she said, but we need more than recordings. I figured, I replied. We need context, she continued. Financial records, medical interference, behavioral patterns. A full picture. A full picture. I understood. Because this wasn't just about catching them in a moment. It was about proving a pattern. They're trying to build a case that I'm incompetent, I said. Yes, Susan confirmed. So we build the opposite. I leaned back slightly, absorbing that. And we don't confront them yet, I added. No, she said firmly. Not yet. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind. What are they planning to make me sign? Susan didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the documents again, then back at me. Best case, she said slowly. Power of attorney, control over your finances. My stomach tightened. And worst case, her eyes held mine. Guardianship, she said. The word felt like a door slamming shut. Guardianship. Legal control over my life, my decisions, my independence, everything. They could decide where I live, I whispered. Yes. What I do. Yes. Whether I can even access my own money. Susan nodded once. Yes. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. But beneath that, something else began to rise again. Not fear. Not this time. Something sharper, more defined. They think I won't fight, I said quietly. Susan didn't smile. But there was something in her eyes. They're counting on it, she said. I looked down at the recordings, at the bank statements, at the pieces of my life they had quietly rearranged. Then I looked back up. Well, I said softly, they're about to be very disappointed. And for the first time since I heard my son's voice in that hallway, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. That evening, I stepped into the main house with a smile on my face. It felt strange. Not because I hadn't smiled in that kitchen before, but because this time it wasn't instinct. It was intentional, carefully chosen, controlled. Mom Daniel looked up from the counter, surprised. Hey, I didn't hear you come in. I almost laughed at the irony. That's all right, I said gently. I don't always hear everything either. Rachel turned from the stove, her expression warm, practiced. Mia, perfect timing. We're just about to have dinner. I nodded, stepping further inside. The kitchen smelled like garlic and roasted chicken, comforting familiar. For a brief moment, I felt the old version of this life flicker back into place. Then I remembered the recordings, and the warmth vanished. Emily sat at the table, her phone resting beside her plate. She looked up and smiled. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart, I said softer this time. That part at least didn't require effort. We sat down together, and the performance began. Daniel spoke a little louder than necessary, enunciating each word. So, Mom, he said, how was your appointment today? I lowered myself into the chair, slowly pretending to adjust my hearing aid. It was fine, I replied. They said things are improving. Rachel's eyes flickered just for a second. Improving, she repeated lightly. That's great. There it was. The smallest crack. She hadn't expected that. I nodded, taking a sip of water. Yes, I can hear much more clearly now. I let the words sit there. Uncomfortable. Unsettling. Daniel shifted in his seat. Well, that's good, he said quickly. Really good. Rachel recovered faster. That must be such a relief for you, she said, her tone smooth again. It is, I agreed. It's nice to not miss things. Another pause. I watched them carefully. Not openly. Just enough. Rachel's fingers tightened slightly around her fork before relaxing again. Daniel avoided my eyes for a moment, focusing instead on cutting his food. They were adjusting, recalculating. Good. Actually, Daniel said, after a moment, forcing a casual tone, we've been meaning to talk to you about something. Of course you have. I tilted my head slightly. Oh, Rachel leaned in just a bit, her smile softening. It's nothing serious, she said. Just planning ahead. Making sure everything is organized. For your peace of mind. Peace of mind. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. I like peace of mind, I said. Daniel chuckled, relieved. Yeah, exactly. That's all this is. He reached for a folder on the counter. There it was. The papers. My heartbeat slowed, not sped up. Slowed. Focused. Just some documents, he continued. Basic stuff. Makes things easier if we ever need to help you with, anything. I glanced at the folder, then back at him. What kind of documents? I asked. Rachel answered quickly. Nothing complicated, just authorization forms. In case you need assistance with appointments, finances, small things. Small things. I nodded again. I see. Then I leaned forward slightly. I'm not sure I understand, I added, letting a hint of confusion enter my voice. Can you explain it to me? Daniel jumped in immediately. Of course, Mom. It's just if something ever happens or if you need help managing things, this lets me step in without a bunch of legal hassle. I frowned slightly. So, you would be in charge. Rachel smiled gently. Not in charge. Just helping. Helping. Such a soft word. Such a dangerous one. I let a small silence stretch between us. Then I nodded. Well, I suppose that makes sense. Daniel visibly relaxed. Exactly, he said. It's just planning. I looked down at my plate, then back up again. When would you want me to sign? Rachel's eyes flickered again. Whenever you feel comfortable, she said smoothly. There's no rush. But there was. I had heard it the night before. We don't have much time. The bank isn't going to wait forever. I smiled faintly. Maybe soon, I said. I'd like to think about it first. Daniel nodded quickly. Of course. Take your time. Rachel didn't speak, but I could feel her watching me, measuring, trying to decide what had changed. The rest of dinner passed in a strange, careful rhythm. Every word felt like part of a game. Every glance carried weight. Emily barely spoke. She pushed her food around her plate, her eyes occasionally flicking between her parents and me. She knew something was off. Children always do. After dinner, I stood slowly, gathering my things. Well, I said I should head back. I'll walk you, Daniel offered immediately. That's all right, I replied. It's just a few steps. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Rachel gave me a soft smile. Good night, Mia. Good night. Emily looked up. Good night, Grandma. Good night, sweetheart. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, closing the door gently behind me. The moment I was alone, the smile faded. Not into fear, into clarity. Back in my cottage, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the quiet, letting the silence settle around me. Then I reached up slowly and tapped my hearing aid. Another recording saved. Every word from dinner. Every tones, every carefully chosen phrase. I walked to the table and sat down, opening the app, replaying parts of the conversation. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. Daniel's nervous eagerness. Rachel's controlled precision. Their urgency hidden beneath politeness. They thought they were guiding me. In reality, they were revealing themselves. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't need to look. Susan, I said as I opened it. She stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning my face. Well, she asked. I exhaled slowly. They made their move. Her expression sharpened. Already I nodded. Documents, authorization, framed as help. Susan crossed her arms, and I told them I'd think about it. She studied me for a moment, then nodded once. Good. I walked back to the table, handing her my phone. Listen. She pressed play. As the recording filled the room, I watched her reaction carefully. When it ended, she set the phone down slowly. They're pushing faster than I expected, she said. They're running out of time, I replied. She looked at me. You heard more, I nodded. Debt. Pressure. Something big. Susan exhaled. That makes them unpredictable. I leaned back in my chair. I know. Silence settled between us. Then she asked, how did it feel? The question caught me off guard. Being there, she clarified, at that table, I thought about it. The performance, the lies, the calm. It felt, I paused, searching for the right word. Clear. She raised an eyebrow. Clear, I nodded. They think I'm weak, I said, that I'll just follow along. Susan didn't interrupt. They don't see me anymore, I continued. Not really. I met her eyes. That's their mistake. A slow, almost satisfied look crossed her face. Yes, she said quietly. It is. I looked down at the folder still sitting on my table. The invisible version of it, the one Daniel had shown me. The one he expected me to sign. They're going to push again, I said. They will, Susan agreed. And next time? I reached for my phone, my fingers steady. I'll be ready. Because now I wasn't just listening. I was waiting, and the longer they believed I couldn't hear them, the louder the truth was becoming. The next morning I woke before the sun, not because I wanted to, but because my mind refused to stay quiet any longer. There is a certain kind of pain that doesn't scream. It settles. It waits. And then in the stillness of early morning it asks you questions you can't ignore. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my hands thinking about Daniel, not the man in the kitchen last night, but the boy he used to be. The boy who would run into my arms after school, his backpack bouncing wildly behind him. The boy who once cried because he thought he had broken my favorite mug and kept saying, "I didn't mean to. Mom, I didn't mean to." The boy who used to trust me the way I had trusted him. When did that change? Or maybe the harder question was, had I just not wanted to see it? I stood slowly and walked to the small dresser, pulling open the drawer where I kept a few old photographs. My fingers hovered over one in particular, Daniel at 10 years old, grinning beside Robert at the marina. They both looked so steady, so real. I pressed the photo back down and closed the drawer. Because memories, I was starting to realize, could become a kind of trap. They make you hold on to who someone used to be, while ignoring who they've become. And right now I couldn't afford that. By mid-morning, Susan was back. She didn't knock this time. She walked in like she belonged, which in a way she did. "We need to talk about Daniel," she said, setting her bag on the table. I nodded. "I've been thinking about that." She studied me carefully. "What do you know about his finances?" I hesitated. "Less than I thought I did." She gave a small, humorless smile. "That's usually how this starts." I sat down across from her. "He's always been ambitious," I said slowly. "He wanted to succeed, to provide, to be respected." Susan nodded. "That's not the problem." "No," I agreed quietly. "It's what he did when that wasn't enough." She leaned forward slightly. "I did some digging this morning," she said. "Public records, property filings, business licenses." My chest tightened, and Susan slid a few printed pages across the table. "Take a look." I picked them up, scanning the information. At first, it didn't make much sense. Numbers, addresses, loan amounts. Then I saw it. A line that made my stomach drop. Balloon payment due. I looked up. "What is this?" Susan's voice was calm, but there was no softness in it. "It means he took out a large loan, likely with low payments at first, and now a massive lump sum is coming due." "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then answered, "More than he can pay." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "This is what they were talking about," I said slowly. "The pressure. The timeline." Susan nodded. "Yes." I looked back down at the papers, my mind racing. "But why my house?" I asked. "Why not sell something else, downsize, fix the problem properly?" Susan didn't answer right away. Instead, she pointed to another document. "Because he's already leveraged everything else." I scanned it. Refinanced mortgage, second lien, credit lines, even a note about a luxury vehicle lease. My chest tightened. "He's been living beyond his means," I said. "Yes," Susan replied. "And now he's out of options." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process it all. The dinners, the smiles, the careful concern. It wasn't just manipulation. It was desperation wrapped in politeness. And desperation can justify almost anything in a person's mind. But that still doesn't explain everything I said. Susan's eyes met mine. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." She reached into her bag and pulled out one more document. "This does." I took it slowly. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the heading registered. Educational trust account. My heart stopped. "This is Emily's," I said. Susan nodded. My hands began to tremble, not from fear this time, but from something much sharper. "How much is left?" I asked. Susan didn't answer. She didn't need to, because I could see it. The balance. Nearly empty. A hollow space where something important used to be. "No," I whispered. I looked up at her, my chest tightening painfully. "No, that's not possible." But it was. The numbers didn't lie. The transfers were there. Clear. Recent. Systematic. "He used it," I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay composed. "He took her future, Susan's expression softened, but only slightly. Yes, she said quietly. The room blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the sheer weight of it. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about betrayal between a mother and a son. This was something deeper, something uglier. Because Daniel hadn't just crossed a line. He had erased it. He looked me in the eye, I said slowly, sat across from me, asked me to sign those papers. My voice hardened, while knowing what he had already done. Susan didn't interrupt, didn't comfort. She let me feel it, all of it. Because this part mattered. This clarity, this anger, this truth. I could almost understand it if it was just me, I continued. If he convinced himself I'd be okay, that I wouldn't notice. I swallowed hard. But Emily, my voice dropped. She's 14. Susan nodded. And she has no idea, she said. That hit differently. Because now I understood something else. Why Emily had been so quiet, so watchful, so unsettled. Children don't always know the facts, but they feel the cracks. And this one was already breaking through. I stood abruptly, pacing the small room. He's not just desperate, I said. He's unraveling. Susan watched me carefully. Yes, she said, and that makes him unpredictable. I stopped, turning toward her. And Rachel, her expression shifted. She's not unraveling, Susan said. She's calculating. The difference settled into place immediately. Daniel was reacting. Rachel was planning. She's pushing this, I said. Yes, and she knows exactly what she's doing. Susan didn't hesitate. Yes. Silence filled the room again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was sharp, focused, because now the picture was complete. Not partially, not vaguely, completely. They needed my house, not because they wanted it, because they had to have it. Or everything they had built the image, the lifestyle, the illusion would collapse. And they were willing to take it from me. By convincing the world I couldn't stop them. I walked back to the table slowly and placed my hands flat against it. They think I'm the easiest solution, I said. Susan nodded. You are, she said, in their minds. I looked down at the documents one last time, then pushed them aside. Not anymore, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. Susan leaned forward slightly. What are you thinking? I met her eyes. I'm thinking, I paused, that they've already gone too far to stop. She didn't argue, because she knew it was true. They're going to push harder, I continued. Faster. They don't have time to be careful anymore. Susan nodded slowly. And that's when they make mistakes. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, clearer. They've been playing this game for months, I said. Susan tilted her head slightly. And now I allowed myself the smallest, faintest smile. Now I said it's my turn, because they thought they were closing in on me. But they hadn't realized something very important. The moment I heard them, the moment I understood everything, the game had already changed. That afternoon, I didn't expect anyone to come by. Not Daniel, not Rachel, and certainly not Emily. Which is why when I heard the soft knock on my cottage door, it caught me off guard. I hesitated for just a second before opening it. Emily stood there, her backpack still slung over one shoulder, her fingers gripping the strap tightly. Hi, Grandma, she said, her voice quieter than usual. Hi, sweetheart, I replied gently. Come in. She stepped inside, slowly glancing behind her once before I closed the door. That small gesture didn't escape me. She didn't want to be seen. We walked to the table and she sat down without being asked. That alone told me something was wrong. Emily had always been polite, almost overly so, but she was also light, easy, expressive. Today she was none of those things. What's going on? I asked softly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the surface of the table, tracing a faint scratch in the wood with her fingertip. Then she asked very quietly, Are you okay? The question surprised me. Not because of the words, but because of the weight behind them. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I am, I said gently. Why do you ask? She shrugged, but it wasn't convincing. I don't know, she said. Things just feel weird. We sat in silence for a moment. I could feel the tension in her, the confusion, the fear she didn't yet have words for. And I realized something important. She didn't come here for answers. She came here because something inside her already knew. I heard them talking, she said suddenly. My heart skipped. Your parents? I asked carefully. She nodded. Not everything, she added quickly. Just bits. They keep lowering their voices when I get close. I stayed still, didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. They were arguing last night, she continued. Mom was saying something about timing and before it's too late. And Dad said something about you signing papers. There it was again. The same words. The same urgency. Emily looked up at me then, her eyes searching. Grandma, what's going on? The question hung in the air between us. Simple, direct, impossible to answer honestly without pulling her into something she wasn't ready for. I took a slow breath. Sometimes I said carefully adults make decisions that aren't very good ones. She frowned slightly, like what I hesitated, because I could feel the line I was standing on. Tell her too little and she stays confused. Tell her too much and I pull her into the middle of a storm. But before I could decide, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded stack of papers. I found these, she said. My chest tightened. She placed them on the table and slid them toward me. I unfolded them slowly, and there it was. Guardianship petition forms, partially filled out, my name, Daniel's name. Legal language that twisted my stomach into knots. She's not capable of managing financial or medical decisions. The words blurred for a moment. Emily watched my face closely. I wasn't supposed to see them, she said quietly. They were in Mom's office drawer. I looked up at her. And you read them, she nodded. I didn't understand all of it, she admitted, but it sounded like they were trying to take control of everything. I swallowed hard, because she understood more than she thought, more than they ever intended her to. Emily, I began choosing my words carefully. You shouldn't have to carry this. Her expression changed, not into relief, into frustration. I already am, she said. The honesty in her voice hit me deeper than anything else. I hear them arguing all the time, she continued. About money. About the house. About you. She looked down at her hands. And they think I don't notice. That sounded familiar. Too familiar. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. I'm sorry, I said softly. She shook her head quickly. No, it's not your fault. Then she hesitated and asked the question I wasn't prepared for. Did they do something wrong? The room felt still, like everything had paused waiting for my answer. I could lie. I could protect her. But something told me she didn't need protection from the truth. She needed protection from confusion. So I answered carefully. Yes, I said. Her fingers tightened slightly under mine. Are they going to get in trouble? I paused, then said honestly, they might. She nodded slowly. But she didn't look surprised, which told me everything I needed to know. A few seconds passed before she spoke again. I thought maybe it was just me, she said. Like, maybe I was imagining things. I shook my head gently. No, I said, you're not. She let out a small breath, and for the first time since she walked in, her shoulders relaxed slightly. I didn't know who to talk to, she admitted. I squeezed her hand. You can always come to me. She looked up at me, then her eyes softer. I know, she said. And she meant it. We sat together for a while after that, not talking, just being. Sometimes silence is the safest place when everything else feels unstable. But eventually I knew I had to guide her away from the center of this, carefully, gently. Emily, I said, I need you to do something for me. She looked up. What? I need you to stay out of this as much as you can, I said. Focus on school, your life. Let the adults handle the rest. She frowned slightly. But I know I interrupted softly. It feels wrong. It feels like you should do something. She nodded. Yeah. I smiled faintly. That means you have a good heart, I said. But sometimes, doing the right thing means not putting yourself in the middle. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay. I studied her for a moment. You've already done more than you realize, I added. She tilted her head. How? I glanced at the papers on the table. By telling me, I said. Her eyes flickered to the documents. Then back to me. A quiet understanding passed between us. She hadn't just shared information. She had chosen a side, not against her parents, but for what was right. And that mattered. More than anything. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door, Grandma, yes. She looked at me, her expression uncertain. Are you going to be okay? I stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. Yes, I said. This time there was no hesitation. Because now, I knew I would be. I promise, I added. She nodded, then gave me a quick hug before slipping out the door. I watched her walk back toward the house, her figure small against the late afternoon light. And for a moment, my chest ached. Because this wasn't just about me. It never had been. This was about what kind of family we were, what kind of people we chose to be. And right now, that choice was clearer than ever. I closed the door and walked back to the table. The guardianship papers still lay there, incomplete, but very real. I picked them up slowly, reading through the language again, the assumptions, the claims, the quiet, calculated way they erased me. Then I set them down, carefully, deliberately, because now everything had changed. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This wasn't just recordings or missing money. This was proof of intent, a plan, a line they had already crossed. And more importantly, a line I would not let them cross again. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady. Then I opened the recording app and created a new folder. I labeled it simply Evidence. Because that's what all of this was now. Not confusion, not doubt, not fear, evidence. And if they were preparing to make their move, then it was time I prepared mine. The next morning, I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. Agreement, not resistance, not suspicion, not even hesitation, just calm, willing agreement. Because nothing lowers a person's guard faster than believing they've already won. I waited until mid-morning long enough that Daniel would be settled into his routine, but not so late that the day felt rushed. Then I walked across the yard and knocked on the back door of the main house. Rachel opened it. For just a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Surprise! Then it was gone. Mia, she said warmly. What a nice surprise. I smiled. I was hoping we could talk, I said. Of course, she replied, stepping aside. Come in. Daniel appeared from the kitchen almost immediately, as if he had been listening for my voice. Mom, everything okay? I nodded, stepping inside. Yes, I said gently. Actually, I've been thinking about what you mentioned last night. I let that sentence hang for just a moment. I watched them. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Rachel went very still. Hooked. I think you're right, I continued. Daniel blinked. About the paperwork, I said. The planning. Relief spread across his face too quickly. Really, he said. Rachel didn't speak, but her eyes sharpened. I don't want things to be complicated later, I added. If something happens, I'd rather you be able to help. Daniel let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Mom, that's exactly what we've been trying to say. Rachel stepped in smoothly. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, she said. Of course you do. I nodded. I understand that now, I said. The lie came easily, too easily. And that frightened me just a little, because it meant I was changing too, adapting, learning their language. I'd like to go ahead and sign, I added. Daniel's reaction was immediate. Great, he said. That's great, Mom. We can, Rachel touched his arm lightly. Let's not rush, she said gently, though her eyes betrayed her urgency. We should do this properly. Of course. Properly. With a notary, she added. And maybe make it a nice, relaxed setting. No pressure. I smiled faintly. That sounds lovely. Maybe brunch this weekend, Daniel suggested. Rachel nodded. Yes. Saturday. We'll keep it simple. Simple. That word again. Saturday works for me, I said. We exchanged a few more polite words before I excused myself, leaving them with exactly what they wanted, confidence. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt different, sharper, clearer. Because now the trap was set. Back in my cottage, Susan was already waiting. She looked up the moment I walked in. Well, she asked. I closed the door behind me. They took it, I said. A slow smile spread across her face. Of course they did. I walked to the table and sat down. They want to do it Saturday, I continued. Brunch, notary present. Susan nodded already, thinking ahead. That gives us time. I leaned forward slightly. I told them I was ready. She studied me carefully. And how did that feel? I paused. Then answered honestly. Strange. Because it was. agreeing with them, playing along, letting them believe I was still exactly who they thought I was. "It won't feel strange for long," Susan said quietly. "It'll feel necessary." I nodded, because she was right. That afternoon we began preparing. Not emotionally, not mentally, strategically. Susan made a few calls first. Quiet ones, careful ones. Then she handed me a piece of paper. "A name," she said. I looked down. "Attorney Linda Garcia. She specializes in elder law," Susan explained. "Protective cases, financial exploitation. Exactly what this is." I traced the name with my finger. "And she's good," Susan met my eyes. "She's the kind of good you want on your side before things explode." That was enough for me. The meeting with Linda Garcia took place the next day. Her office was calm, understated, professional, but there was something else beneath it. Precision. Everything felt intentional. She greeted us with a firm handshake and a steady gaze. "Mia," she said, "I've read the summary Susan sent. Why don't you tell me everything in your own words?" So I did. From the hallway, to the recordings, to the bank, to the guardianship papers, I didn't leave anything out. And when I finished, the room was quiet. Linda leaned back slightly in her chair. "You've done exactly the right thing so far," she said. Relief flickered through me. "But we need to move carefully from here," she continued. I nodded. "I understand." She tapped a pen lightly against her desk. "They're preparing to take control," she said. "Financially first, legally next." "Yes," I replied. "And Saturday," she added, "is their move." I felt my chest tighten. "Yes." Linda's eyes sharpened. "Then Saturday becomes ours." The shift in her tone was subtle, but powerful. I leaned forward slightly. "What do we do?" She outlined it step by step. Clear, precise, unemotional, exactly what I needed. First, she said, we secure everything they could try to take before Saturday. I nodded. "My accounts, yes. Change access. Remove unauthorized links. Require dual verification." Susan was already writing notes. "Second," Linda continued, "your medical authority." I blinked. "What about it? They may try to use that as leverage," she said. "We preempt it. How? You assign temporary medical power of attorney to someone you trust." I didn't hesitate. "Susan." Susan looked up surprised, but only for a second. Then she nodded. "I've got you." Linda smiled slightly. "Good." "Third," she said, "your will and property." I felt my breath catch. "The Marina House?" She nodded. "We update everything." Quietly. Immediately. I exhaled slowly. "Can they still try to use it?" "They can try," Linda said, "but they won't succeed." That mattered. More than anything. By the time we left her office, everything had shifted again. Not emotionally, practically. Every vulnerable point in my life was being reinforced, protected, reclaimed. Back in the car, I stared out the window as the city passed by. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I felt like I was ahead. "They think Saturday is the end," I said quietly. Susan glanced at me. "And what is it really?" I allowed myself a small, steady breath. The beginning. Because now I wasn't walking into that brunch unprepared. I wasn't walking in as the woman they thought I was. The confused one. The dependent one. The easy one. I was walking in with everything they didn't expect. Truth, evidence, and control. That night, as I sat alone in my cottage, I opened the folder Linda had given me. Inside were copies of everything we had prepared, updated documents, secured accounts, legal protections. Each page felt like a piece of armor. Not heavy, not restrictive, protective. I placed the folder gently on the table, then reached up and touched my hearing aid. The same device they had underestimated, the same one that had captured the moment everything changed. "They think I'm ready to sign," I whispered to the empty room, and I smiled faintly. Because in a way, I was. Just not what they were expecting. Saturday arrived dressed like a celebration. Sunlight spilled across the backyard in soft golden sheets catching on the glass patio table Rachel had decorated with fresh flowers and neatly folded linen napkins. There was music playing, something light and cheerful, and the smell of cinnamon pastries drifted through the air as if this were any ordinary family brunch. If a stranger had walked in, they would have seen a perfect picture. A loving family, a careful daughter-in-law, a devoted son, a gentle, aging mother being taken care of. But I wasn't a stranger, and I could hear everything. I stepped out of my cottage, slowly smoothing the front of my blouse, my movements deliberate, unhurried. I wanted them to see calm, comfort, compliance. Mia Rachel called out the moment she saw me. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied, offering a small smile. Daniel was already standing, pulling out a chair for me. "Here, Mom, sit. We saved you the best spot." "Of course you did." I lowered myself into the chair, glancing briefly at the setup. 4 plates, 4 cups, and at the far end of the table a woman I didn't recognize. The notary. She gave me a polite nod. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "it's nice to meet you." "You as well," I replied. Rachel moved gracefully around the table, pouring coffee. "Just a quiet little morning," she said. "Nothing stressful. Nothing stressful." I wrapped my hands around the cup. Warm. Steady. Everything about this moment was designed to make me feel safe, to make me trust, to make me sign. Emily was already seated, unusually quiet, her eyes flicking toward me for just a second before dropping back to her plate. She knew. Not everything, but enough. And I gave her the smallest, almost invisible nod. "I'm okay." She exhaled slowly. We began eating. At first it was all surface conversation. The weather, school, a neighbor's new fence. Rachel laughed easily. Daniel smiled often. The notary remained politely neutral. But underneath it all, there was tension. Subtle, tight, like a thread stretched just a little too far. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, setting down his fork, "we can go over the documents whenever you're ready." There it was. The moment they had been building toward. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "Let's take a look." Rachel moved quickly, retrieving the folder from the table beside her. She placed it gently in front of me, her movements smooth, practiced. "No pressure," she said softly. "We'll just walk through everything together." I opened the folder. The pages inside were neatly organized, clean, professional, and carefully misleading. I recognized the language immediately, not because I had studied law, but because I had already seen the truth behind it. Power of attorney, financial authority, asset control, and buried within it, the beginning of guardianship language, subtle but unmistakable. I looked up. "I'm not sure I understand all of this," I said, letting my voice carry just a hint of uncertainty. Daniel leaned forward. "Of course," he said quickly. "That's why we're here. I'll explain everything." He began talking. Slowly, clearly, like he was guiding a child. "This just allows me to help you manage things if needed," he said. "Bills, appointments, nothing changes unless you want it to." I tilted my head slightly. "So, I wouldn't be in charge anymore," Rachel stepped in smoothly. "You would always be in charge," she said. "This just gives Daniel the ability to step in if necessary." If necessary. Such a flexible phrase. I frowned lightly. "I'm sorry," I said. "Could you say that again?" Daniel repeated himself. Louder this time, more direct, and that was exactly what I wanted. Every repetition, every clarification, every attempt to simplify made the truth clearer for everyone at the table, even the notary. I glanced at her briefly. Her expression had shifted just slightly. She was listening more carefully now. Good. I turned back to the papers. And this part I asked, pointing to a section. "What does this mean?" Daniel hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then answered, "It's just standard wording," he said. "Legal stuff. Nothing to worry about." I looked at him. Directly. "For what I asked." Another pause. Rachel stepped in again. "It's just in case additional support is needed later," she said. "It protects everyone." "Protects?" Another soft word. Another dangerous one. I nodded slowly. "I see." Then I leaned back slightly. "But I thought this was just about helping with bills," I added. Daniel shifted in his seat. "It is," he said quickly. "Then why does it mention medical decisions?" I asked. Silence. Brief, but heavy. Rachel recovered. "It's just a precaution," she said, "in case of emergencies. And if I don't agree with a decision," I asked. "You would," Daniel said, a little too quickly. I held his gaze. "What if I don't?" I repeated. The air changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Because now, they weren't guiding anymore. They were defending. Rachel's smile tightened just slightly. "Mia," she said gently, "we're just trying to make things easier for you." I let a small silence stretch between us. Then I nodded. "I understand," I said. And I did. More than they realized. I looked back down at the papers, turned a page, paused, then tapped another section lightly. "And this part?" I asked. Daniel leaned in. Could you read it out loud for me?" I interrupted softly. He blinked. "Read it, yes," I said. "I want to make sure I hear it correctly." Rachel's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, but Daniel nodded. "Okay." He cleared his throat and began to read. The legal language sounded different out loud. Less harmless, less vague, more real. Granting authority over financial assets, decision-making capacity, designation of guardian if deemed necessary. There it was, out in the open, no longer hidden in small print, no longer softened by explanation. Just truth, spoken clearly, in front of witnesses. I let him finish. Then I looked up. The silence that followed was no longer comfortable. It was heavy, awkward, exposed. And for the first time that morning, Daniel didn't look confident. Rachel didn't look in control. They looked uncertain, because something wasn't going the way they expected. Good. I placed my hand gently on the papers and smiled, softly, calmly, as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything had, because now they had said it, out loud, in front of someone who mattered, and they still had no idea that I had heard everything long before this moment. For a moment, no one spoke. The morning sun still glowed warmly over the table, birds still chirped somewhere beyond the fence, and the faint music Rachel had chosen continued to play softly in the background. But the illusion had cracked. Not shattered yet, but cracked enough that everyone could feel it. I kept my hand resting lightly on the papers, my expression calm, almost thoughtful. Inside, however, every part of me was focused, precise, steady, waiting for the exact moment to move. Daniel shifted in his seat first. "So?" he said, forcing a small smile. "Does that make sense now?" I looked up at him. Directly, more than it did before I replied. That answer seemed to relieve him just slightly. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't relax at all. She was watching me, carefully, measuring something she couldn't quite define. Good. Let her wonder. I glanced briefly at the notary. She was no longer just sitting politely. She was alert now, listening, observing. Exactly what I needed. I took a slow breath, then closed the folder gently. "I have a question," I said. "Of course," Daniel replied quickly. "If this is just to help me." I continued, my voice soft but clear. "Why does it give you control over my property?" Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Daniel blinked. "It doesn't. It says it right here," I interrupted gently, tapping the page again. "Authority over assets." Rachel leaned forward slightly, her tone smooth but firmer now. "Mia, that's just standard language for what I asked again. This time I didn't soften the question." Rachel hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. The notary noticed. I saw it in the way her posture shifted, in the way her eyes narrowed slightly. Daniel cleared his throat. "It's just in case you need help managing things," he said. I tilted my head. Managing or controlling? Another silence. This one longer, more uncomfortable. Emily looked up from her plate, her eyes moving quickly between all of us. She could feel it too, the tension, the truth pressing closer to the surface. Rachel's smile thinned. "Mia," she said, her voice still gentle but losing warmth, "you're overthinking this." I let that sit there. Then I nodded slowly. "Maybe I am," I said. A flicker of relief crossed Daniel's face. Too soon. Which is why I added softly, "I'd like someone else to explain it." That was the moment everything shifted. Rachel's eyes sharpened instantly. "What do you mean?" she asked. I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked past them, toward the edge of the patio, and right on cue, "Good morning," a calm, steady voice said. Attorney Linda Garcia stepped into view. The air changed. Completely. Daniel turned so quickly his chair scraped against the ground. "What is this?" he demanded. Rachel's expression hardened, controlled, but no longer warm. "This," I said quietly, "is me making sure I understand what I'm signing. Linda walked forward with quiet confidence, placing a folder on the table. "I represent Mia Carter," she said evenly. "And I'd be happy to clarify any legal language." The notary straightened immediately. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Linda, "I wasn't informed. You are now Linda," replied calmly. Daniel looked between us, his face flushing. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, his voice tight. I met his eyes. For the first time since this began, I didn't soften my gaze. "I wanted to hear everything clearly," I said. Rachel leaned forward, her tone sharper now. "This is unnecessary," she said. "We were handling this as a family." Linda didn't even look at her. "Then you should have nothing to worry about," she replied. That landed exactly where it needed to. Rachel's jaw tightened. Daniel stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We're just trying to help, I repeated softly, and then I reached up and tapped my hearing aid. The movement was small, almost insignificant, but it changed everything. "I heard you," I said. The words fell into the silence like a stone. Daniel froze. Rachel didn't move at all. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked, but his voice had already changed, less certain, less controlled. I picked up my phone, opened the app, and pressed play. "She's too deaf to hear us anyway." Daniel's voice filled the space. Clear, undeniable. Rachel's reply followed. "Good. Then we just need her to sign before she figures anything out." No one moved. No one spoke. Even the music in the background seemed to fade into nothing. I let the recording finish, then set the phone down gently. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. It was absolute. Daniel's face had gone pale. Rachel's composure, so carefully constructed, cracked just enough to reveal something underneath. Not fear, not yet, but calculation. Fast, sharp, looking for a way out. "There's more," Linda said calmly. She opened her folder, sliding documents across the table. "Unauthorized financial transfers," she continued. "Insurance modifications, guardianship preparation forms." The words hit like waves, one after another. Relentless. Daniel shook his head. "No, this isn't. Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be, because this time, he listened. For the first time in a long time, he actually listened. I looked at him, really looked. Not at the boy I remembered. Not at the son I wanted him to be. At the man sitting in front of me, the one who had made these choices. "Don't tell me it's not what it sounds like," I said quietly. "Because I heard it." His mouth opened, then closed. No words came. Rachel leaned back slightly, her expression shifting again. Colder now, detached. "This isn't illegal," she said. "We were preparing to help her." Linda turned her head slightly. "It becomes illegal when it involves deception and coercion," she replied. The notary spoke up, then her voice careful. I need to pause this proceeding," she said. "This situation is no longer clear." Good. Everything was unraveling, exactly as it should. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "Mom?" "I can explain," he said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in me. "No, you can't. Because there are moments in life where explanations stop mattering, where intentions no longer soften actions, where the truth is so clear that anything else becomes meaningless. And this was one of those moments. For a few seconds, no one moved. Not Daniel, not Rachel, not even Emily. It was as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then Rachel stood up, slowly, deliberately. And the moment she did, I knew something had changed. Not in me, in her. She wasn't going to pretend anymore. "This is exactly why we needed those documents," she said, her voice calm but stripped of warmth. "She's confused, emotional, unstable." The words landed like ice. Daniel turned toward her sharply. "Rachel, no," she cut in, her tone sharper now. "Look at her. She's accusing us based on what recording she barely understands." I felt something inside me go very still, very quiet. Because now, she wasn't hiding. She was rewriting. "She's been declining for months," Rachel continued, addressing the notary now. "We've been trying to manage things responsibly, but this is exactly what we were worried about." I watched her. Every word, Every shift in tone, every calculated attempt to reshape the truth, and for the first time, I saw her clearly, not as a daughter-in-law, not as family, but as someone who had already decided what I was worth. Daniel shook his head. "That's not Rachel, stop." She turned to him, her eyes flashing. "Stop what?" "Saying what's true," she snapped. "We are drowning, Daniel." And she stopped herself. Too late. The word hung there. Drowning. The truth slipping out from behind control. Daniel's face changed. Not just embarrassment, not just fear, something deeper, something closer to collapse. "Don't," he said quietly. Rachel exhaled sharply, turning away from him. Then she looked back at me. And this time, there was no mask left. "You don't understand what you're doing," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "No," I replied softly. "I think I do." Her eyes narrowed. "Do you?" she asked. "Because if we lose everything, Rachel," Daniel said again, louder now. But she didn't stop. "If we lose this house, if the bank comes after us, if everything falls apart, what do you think happens then?" she demanded. Silence. Heavy. Raw. Real. There it was. Not dressed up, not softened, not hidden behind polite words. Desperation. And underneath it, justification. I looked at her carefully. "You think that makes this okay?" I asked. Her expression didn't change. "It makes it necessary," she said. The honesty of it was almost shocking, not because I didn't expect it, but because she believed it, fully, completely, that what they had done, what they were still trying to do, was justified. Daniel stepped back, running a hand over his face. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he muttered. I turned to him. "No?" I asked quietly. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw something break in his eyes. Not fear, not anger. Shame. "We didn't mean for it to get like this," he said. The words sounded weak, small, fragile, but they were honest, and that made them more painful. I took a slow breath. "Then how did you mean for it to go?" I asked. He hesitated, then answered. I thought I could fix things," he said. "Just temporarily. Use the money. Stabilize everything. And then what I asked." His voice faltered. "I'd put it back," he said. I stared at him. "Put what back?" I asked softly. He didn't answer, because he didn't have to. We both knew. Emily moved then. For the first time since the recording played. She stood up slowly from her chair. "Is that why my college account is gone?" she asked. The words were quiet, but they cut deeper than anything else that had been said. Daniel froze. Rachel turned sharply. "Emily, no," Emily said, her voice trembling but steady. "I want to know." She looked at her father. Directly. "Did you take it?" The silence that followed felt endless. Daniel's shoulders dropped. And in that moment, the last piece fell. "Yes," he said. The word barely made it out, but it was enough. Emily's face changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like something inside her had shifted, permanently. "You said it was safe," she whispered. Daniel stepped forward instinctively. "Emily, I was going to fix it when she asked." He stopped, because there was no answer. There never had been. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "You didn't just lie to Grandma," she said. "You lied to me." That was the moment everything truly broke. Not the recordings, not the documents, not even the confrontation. This was the moment. Because betrayal between adults can be argued, explained, twisted. But betrayal seen through a child's eyes is undeniable. Rachel exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. "This isn't helping," she said. "We need to focus on solutions. There is no solution for this," I said. My voice was calm, but final. She looked at me, irritation flashing again. "Of course there is," she said. "We fix the financial situation, we move forward. You mean," I interrupted gently, "you take my house." She didn't deny it. That said everything. Daniel sank back into his chair, his face pale. "I messed up," he said quietly. "It wasn't a defense. It wasn't an excuse. It was just truth. And somehow that made it worse. Because now there was nothing left to hide behind." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I spoke. You didn't just mess up, I said. You chose this. He flinched, and I didn't stop. You chose to take from me, I continued. You chose to lie. You chose to make me look like I couldn't take care of myself. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because every word landed exactly where it needed to. And you chose to take from your daughter, I added. Emily lowered her gaze, wiping her eyes. Daniel closed his eyes. I know, he whispered, but knowing now didn't undo anything. Rachel shook her head slightly. This isn't productive, she said. We need to think about what comes next. I looked at her, and for the first time, there was no softness left in me when I did. What comes next, I said, is that this ends. The words were simple, but absolute. She studied me, calculating again, looking for weakness, for hesitation, for anything she could still use. She didn't find it, because there was nothing left to take. Not anymore. And in that moment, for the first time since this began, they understood that. Completely. The silence that followed my words didn't feel empty. It felt final. Rachel was the first to move. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't try to soften anything anymore. Instead, she straightened her posture, smoothed the front of her blouse, and picked up her coffee cup with slow, deliberate control. That was when I understood something important. She wasn't trying to fix this. She was already calculating her exit. You're making a mistake, she said calmly. Not to me. To Daniel. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the table, unfocused, as if everything around him had become too much to process all at once. No, he said quietly. I already made it. Rachel's jaw tightened. For the first time since I had known her, she looked annoyed. Not emotional. Not hurt. Just inconvenienced. That's not what I meant, she said, her voice still controlled. I meant this situation. Letting it collapse like this. Daniel let out a hollow breath. It's already collapsed, he replied. She didn't respond, because she knew he was right. The illusion was gone. The careful balance they had maintained between appearances and reality had broken completely, and now there was nothing left to hold it together. Attorney Linda Garcia closed her folder with a quiet, precise motion. Given what has been presented, she said, we'll be initiating formal protective measures immediately. Rachel turned her head slightly. What does that mean? She asked. Linda met her gaze evenly. It means any unauthorized access to Mia's finances will be revoked. Any attempt to proceed with guardianship without proper grounds will be challenged, and all documented actions will be reviewed for legal accountability. The words were calm, measured, but sharp. Rachel held her gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded once. Understood. No argument, no resistance. That confirmed what I had already begun to see. She wasn't fighting this. She was leaving it. The notary cleared her throat quietly. I'll be filing a report regarding this proceeding, she said. Given the circumstances, I cannot validate any documents presented today. Of course, Linda replied. Everything was unraveling, piece by piece. Officially, irreversibly. Emily remained standing beside her chair, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She hadn't said anything since Daniel admitted the truth, but she didn't need to. The way she stood there, the way she looked at him, that was enough. Daniel noticed it too. Slowly, he turned toward her. Emily, he began. She didn't move, didn't step closer, didn't speak. She just looked at him. And in that look was everything he had lost. Trust, respect, safety, things that don't come back easily, or quickly, or sometimes at all. I'm sorry, he said. The words sounded small in the open air, fragile, but they were real. Emily's lips pressed together. Tight. I know, she said. And somehow, that hurt more than anger would have. Because forgiveness wasn't there. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Rachel set her cup down with a soft clink. Well, she said, I think we're done here. She looked at Daniel. You should focus on fixing what you can, she added. There was no softness in her voice, no partnership, no shared responsibility, just distance. Daniel blinked slowly. What does that mean? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. It means this was your plan, she said, and now it's your problem. The words were clean, precise, final. I watched Daniel carefully as they landed. Confusion flickered first, then realization. "You pushed this," he said. "It wasn't loud, but it carried weight." Rachel didn't deny it. "You agreed to it," she replied. He stared at her. Longer this time. And I saw it. The moment the truth shifted again. Because up until now, Daniel had seen himself as part of a team, a partnership, a shared decision. But now, that illusion was breaking too. "You said it was the only way," he said. Rachel shrugged slightly. "It was the fastest way," she corrected. There it was. Not necessity. Efficiency. Daniel shook his head slowly. "You were going to leave," he said. Not a question. A realization. Rachel didn't respond immediately. Then she gave a small, almost indifferent smile. "Eventually," she said. The word echoed in the space between them. Eventually, as if it had always been part of the plan, as if everything leading up to this moment had just been temporary. Daniel let out a hollow laugh. "You were going to take everything and leave me with it." Rachel's expression didn't change. "You were already there," she said. That was the final break. Not just in their plan, in their relationship. Whatever had been holding them together was gone. I stood slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted them to see it. Every movement, every choice, every shift. Intentional. "I think it's time for everyone to go," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried authority, not the kind they had tried to take from me, the kind that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. Linda gathered her things. The notary nodded politely and stepped back. Rachel picked up her bag without another word. She didn't look at me, didn't look at Emily, only at Daniel, for a brief second. And even that glance held no warmth, just calculation. Then she turned and walked away. Just like that. No apology, no regret, no hesitation. Gone. The yard felt quieter after she left. Not peaceful, but clearer, like a storm had passed, leaving everything exposed. Daniel remained seated, motionless, as if he hadn't yet caught up to what had just happened. Emily stepped back slightly, creating space between them. I watched both of them for a long moment, then I spoke. "Daniel." He looked up, slowly. "Yes, you need to understand something," I said. My voice didn't shake, didn't soften, didn't rise. It stayed exactly where it needed to be. "This doesn't get fixed today." He nodded faintly. "I know. And it doesn't get fixed with apologies," I continued. His eyes lowered. "I know," he repeated. I took a small step closer. "You've done damage," I said. "Not just financially, not just legally." I glanced briefly at Emily. "But here," I added. He followed my gaze. And that was when it hit him. Fully, completely. Not what he had risked, what he had broken. "I didn't think—" he started. I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "You didn't." And that was the problem. The sunlight had shifted by then. Softer, lower. The morning had passed. And with it, everything that had existed before it. I looked at the table, at the untouched food, at the papers that would never be signed, at the space where Rachel had stood. Then I looked back at Daniel. "You don't get to make decisions for me anymore," I said. He nodded, slowly. "Okay, and you don't get to decide when this is over," I added. Another nod. "Okay." There was nothing left for him to argue, nothing left to defend, because the truth had already done that work for him. I turned then, walking back toward my cottage, not rushed, not shaken, just steady. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't being moved. I wasn't being guided. I wasn't being managed. I was walking on my own. And behind me, everything they had built on my silence had finally fallen apart. The days after that morning didn't explode into chaos the way I once imagined they might. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations in the driveway, no sudden cinematic endings. Instead, everything became quieter. And in that quiet, the truth settled into place. Rachel was gone by the next afternoon. Not gradually, not emotionally, efficiently. Her car disappeared from the driveway. A few closets emptied. A few drawers cleared. No note, No explanation. Just absence. Emily told me later she heard her parents arguing late into the night. Rachel's voice sharp, Daniel's breaking the kind of conversation that doesn't end with resolution, only separation. She packed while he was still talking, Emily said softly. That didn't surprise me. Rachel had never been the kind of person who stayed once a plan stopped serving her, and now that the plan had failed, there was nothing left for her to take. Daniel didn't come to my cottage for 2 days. Not once. Not even a knock. At first I wasn't sure if I felt relieved or disappointed. Maybe both. But on the third evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the yard in soft gold, there was a knock at my door. I knew it was him before I opened it. Some instincts never leave you. I opened the door slowly. Daniel stood there looking, smaller. Not physically, but in a way that's harder to describe. Like something inside him had collapsed. "Mom," he said. His voice wasn't steady, but it wasn't defensive either. Just tired. "Daniel," I replied. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, his eyes moving around the cottage as if seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was, because this space had changed too, not physically, but in what it represented. It was no longer the place I had been placed, it was the place I had chosen to stand. He sat down at the table without being asked. That too was new. No control, no direction, just presence. "I don't know where to start," he said. I remained standing for a moment, then took the seat across from him. "You can start with the truth," I said. He nodded, slowly. "I thought I could fix it," he said. I didn't interrupt. "I got in deeper than I expected," he continued. The loans, the investments, everything just kept stacking up. His hands rested flat on the table. Still. I kept thinking just one more step, just one more solution, and then I'd be out of it. I watched him carefully, not judging, not softening, just listening. And then Rachel. He hesitated. "What about her?" I asked. He let out a breath. "She saw it faster than I did," he admitted, "saw how bad it was. And instead of stopping, she pushed." I tilted my head slightly. "And you followed?" He nodded. "Yes. No excuse. No deflection. Just truth." That mattered. More than anything he could have said before. "I told myself it was temporary," he added. "That I'd protect you. That you'd never even know." The irony of that hung in the air between us. I let it sit there. Then I spoke. "You didn't protect me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "I know," he said immediately. "You didn't just take money," I continued. "You took control. Uniquely. You took trust. You took my ability to make decisions about my own life." Each word landed carefully, intentionally. He didn't look away. He didn't argue. He just listened. "I know," he repeated. I leaned back slightly. "And Emily," I added. His face tightened. "I know," he said again, "but this time." His voice broke. That was the difference. Not just understanding. Feeling. Too late. But real. "I never meant to hurt her," he said. I nodded slowly. "Most people don't," I replied. "They just choose themselves anyway." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something had shifted. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough. "What do I do now?" he asked. There it was. The question he should have asked months ago. Before the lies. Before the manipulation. Before the damage. I didn't answer right away, because this part mattered, not just what I said, but how I said it. "You take responsibility," I said finally. He nodded. "I will. That means everything," I continued. "The debt, the consequences, the legal fallout. You don't run from any of it. I won't. And you don't expect forgiveness just because you ask for it." That one landed harder. He swallowed. "I understand." I held his gaze. "Do you?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." I studied him for a long moment, looking for something. Not perfection. Not redemption. Just honesty. And for the first time, I saw it. Not fully formed, not guaranteed, but present. "You need help," I said. He nodded. "I know. Real help, I added. Not shortcuts. Not quick fixes. I'll do it, he said. I leaned forward slightly. Therapy, I said. Yes. Financial counseling. Yes. Full transparency. He hesitated for just a second. Then yes. That was the hardest one. And the most important. I nodded. Good. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again. Are you ever going to forgive me? The question came out quietly, carefully, like he wasn't sure he had the right to ask it. And he didn't. Not yet. I took a slow breath. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for, I said. It's something you earn. He nodded. I know. And even then I added it doesn't erase what happened. I understand. I studied him again. You broke something, I said, his eyes lowered. I know. And it may never look the same again. His voice dropped. I know. I leaned back. And that's something you have to live with, I finished. He didn't argue. Didn't defend. Didn't explain. He just accepted it. And that told me more than anything else. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. Thank you, he said. For what, I asked. For not shutting me out completely. I looked at him for a long moment. I didn't keep the door open for you, I said. He frowned slightly. Then why I glanced past him, toward the main house, where Emily still lived. I kept it open for her, I said. Understanding settled over his face. He nodded, then left, quietly. That night I sat alone in my cottage, the air calm, the silence no longer heavy, just still. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was bracing for something, or reacting to something, or uncovering something. I felt settled, not because everything was fixed. It wasn't, not even close, but because everything was clear, and clarity is a kind of peace, even when it hurts. I reached up, touching my hearing aid gently, the same device that had changed everything, that had revealed the truth, that had given me back something I didn't even realize I had lost, my voice. And this time, no one was going to take it from me again. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of my marina house and listened to the water. Not perfectly, not the way I used to, but clearly enough. And more importantly, on my own terms. The air carried that familiar mix of salt and sunlight brushing softly against my skin. A breeze moved through the wind chimes near the door, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't miss the sound. I heard it, fully, completely. And that felt like something more than just hearing. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself. Moving back here hadn't been easy, not physically. That part was simple enough. Boxes, furniture, arrangements. What took longer was everything else. The emotions, the memories, the quiet weight of walking back into a life I thought I had lost. The first night, I barely slept. Every room held echoes of Robert, his chair, his books, the soft indentation on the couch where he used to sit in the evenings. For a moment, I wondered if coming back had been a mistake, if I was reopening something that should have been left closed. But then, the sun came up, and with it, something shifted. Because this house wasn't just a reminder of loss. It was a reminder of who I had been, and who I still was. Susan stood beside me on the porch, holding 2 cups of coffee. Still getting used to it, she asked, handing one to me. I smiled faintly. I think I always will, I said. She nodded. That's not a bad thing. I looked out at the water again. No, I agreed. It's not. She leaned against the railing, watching me carefully. You look different, she said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Different how stronger, she replied simply. I let that settle, then shook my head gently. I don't feel stronger, I admitted. She smiled. That's because strength doesn't feel like anything while you're in it, she said. It just shows up. I thought about that for a moment and realized she was right, because I hadn't woken up one day suddenly brave or suddenly fearless. I had just stopped being silent, and that made all the difference. Emily visited later that afternoon. She didn't knock. She never did anymore. She walked in like she belonged, because she did. Grandma, she called, dropping her bag by the door. In the kitchen, I replied. She came in quickly, her energy lighter than it had been in weeks. Smells good, she said, peeking into the pot on the stove. Careful, I warned with a small smile. It's hot. She grinned. I know. There was something comforting about that. The normalcy, the ease, the absence of tension. We had been rebuilding slowly, not through big conversations, not through forced healing, but through small, honest moments. Cooking together, watching old movies, sitting on the porch without saying anything at all. Trust doesn't come back all at once. It returns in pieces. And we were putting those pieces together, one at a time. How's school? I asked. She shrugged. Better. I nodded. That's good. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, Have you talked to Dad? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to be honest. Yes, I said finally. Is he okay? She asked. I considered that. Not yet, I said. She nodded slowly. Yeah, she murmured. That makes sense. We stood there for a moment, the quiet between us no longer uncomfortable. Just real. He's trying, I added. She looked at me. Trying what? To take responsibility, I said. To fix what he can. Her expression shifted. Not into forgiveness, but into understanding. That's good, she said. I nodded. It is. But I didn't say more. Because this part wasn't about convincing her to feel a certain way. It was about giving her space to decide. And that mattered. More than anything, Daniel didn't come to the house often, not at first. When he did, it was brief, careful, respectful, like he understood he was stepping into a space he no longer had any claim over. The first time he visited, he stood at the edge of the porch, not quite stepping up. I didn't want to come without asking, he said. I nodded. You can come, I told him, but I didn't invite him further. Not yet. That boundary mattered, and he respected it. Over time, things changed, slightly, gradually. He started therapy, financial counseling, sold things he didn't need, cut back, owned up to the consequences instead of avoiding them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast, but it was real, and that mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, I sat alone on the porch again. The same place, the same view, but not the same person. I reached up and adjusted my hearing aid slightly. A small habit now. Comforting. Familiar. I thought back to that moment in the hallway. The whisper. She's too deaf to hear us anyway. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in pain, not in anger, just reflection. Because that moment could have broken me. It almost did. But instead, it woke me up. It forced me to see what I had been avoiding, to question what I had accepted, to reclaim what I had slowly given away. Not just my finances, not just my independence, but my voice. And that was something I would never lose again. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the sound of the water closer. Clear, steady, present. I smiled softly, because hearing wasn't just about sound anymore. It was about awareness, about truth, about choosing to listen, even when it was uncomfortable. Especially then. Later that night, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I paused for a moment, looking around the room, at everything I had regained. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. More than enough. I wasn't the same woman I had been before all of this, and I didn't need to be. Because this version of me, the one who had seen the truth, faced it, and stood anyway, was stronger in a way I had never expected. I reached up one last time, touching my hearing aid gently, then whispered into the quiet, I hear everything now. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. It set me free. Growing older does not mean growing smaller. It does not mean becoming invisible, incapable, or easy to control. Sometimes life tries to convince us that vulnerability is weakness, but the truth is, vulnerability should be met with love, not exploitation. What happened to me wasn't just about money or paperwork. It was about trust, about how easily someone can take advantage when they believe you've lost your voice. But here's what I learned. Your voice doesn't disappear just because others stop listening. You can reclaim it. You can protect yourself. And you can draw boundaries even with the people you love most. Because love without respect is not love. And silence in the face of betrayal only gives it room to grow. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, please remember this. You are still capable. You are still aware. And you are still in control of your life. Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one truth, to remind you of that. So I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have exposed the truth right away? Or waited like I did? Tell me in the comments. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love hearing your stories too. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes being heard can change everything.